What's going on, everyone? I'm Alex. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and I've lost a lot of weight in my life over multiple time periods. Now, right off the bat, I want to tell you what this video isn't. This isn't some bullshit YouTube clickbait. This isn't some promise to lose fat, some snap cuts, do this, do that, do that. I'm just going to sit down. I'm not going to cut this video. I'm not going to chop it up. So I do apologize if there's a lot of ums and pauses, but I really just wanted to sit down in front of the camera and give you guys my raw, unfiltered, not only my raw and unfiltered fat loss story, but really my raw and unfiltered perspective on fat loss as a whole. And I want to take you guys through my whole journey, some of the ups, the downs, the failures, the successes. And I want to tell you guys about what I learned. And then I really want to provide a thesis at the end to kind of wrap up and tell you guys my current perspective on fat loss as a whole. I have notes written down that I'm looking at, but really just a couple bullet points. Again, this is my story. It's something I can really just talk about at any time. I don't really need to script things out for this. So that's what we're going to do here today. I'm going to start right off the bat, share my thesis on fat loss for you now, my current thesis about almost 8 years since I originally lost my first 45-pound chunk of weight, and we'll get into that journey later. But I'm going to share my thesis with you guys now, and then we'll get into my experiences. And the thesis is the only part of this video I've written down, and I wrote it down intentionally because I wanted to get each word correct. And that thesis is the goal for weight loss is to create a caloric deficit in a way you can manage and to maintain your overall deficit for the weeks, months, or years needed to get where you want to be. This is a behavior-focused goal, and it requires a ton of practice and a ton of trial and error to find what works well for you. Throughout this process, never focus on instant gratification. Always focus on forever. If your goal is to find the easiest way to eat less for the rest of your life, then you'll find the behaviors you personally need to keep the weight off for the rest of your life. That's my fat loss thesis. That's what I will come back to at the end of this video to tie things all together. But like I said, like the thumbnail in this video showed, this is just a weight loss story. And everything I do is educational focused. You guys know that by now. But this is also going to be a bit more of a personal YouTube video. But let me just start things off with let me find my spot in my notes. So I am in high school. My entire life I have been pretty damn overweight, as you'll probably see with the thumbnail pictures, and I'll probably pop up some pictures. I'll throw one right here. I was pretty overweight my whole life, and that's just how my life was, and it's how I always thought it would be, and it was something I had acclimated to in a way. I was okay with being overweight as long as I didn't continue to become more overweight. And I was really just in a complacent mindset. Although the problem with my mindset was I was continuing to become more and more overweight every year. I remember one year in high school, I gained 30 pounds and I only grew like an inch. And I was like, well, that doesn't add up. And it was because I was eating everything in sight. And really, I had a high school baseball coach tell me that if I lost some weight, I could be a pretty good baseball player. And for whatever reason, the weirdest light bulb clicked in my head that, oh yeah, like I could do that. That wouldn't be that hard. I can do that and I'll have a reason for it. And it was almost like I had a reason not to be complacent. And there was a weird sense of control that came from him telling me that. And it's something I've really taken with me ever since, is that sense of control that comes from weight loss. But that day I go home, we had a chalkboard in my parents' old kitchen. And on that chalkboard, I wrote 8 minutes. I went outside after that and I jogged for 8 minutes. I did an 8-minute run. I knew jogging was something I didn't hate and it was something I wasn't terrible at. So that was going to be my mode for fat loss. That was going to be what I started with. And when I came back into my house after the run, I erased the 2 zeros on the board and I wrote a 10. So now I wrote 8:10. The next day I ran for 8 minutes, 10 seconds. The next day, 8 minutes, 20 seconds. And I kept continuing to increase that. I also jumped into what was essentially a no junk diet. I cut out all desserts, sodas, pizza, chips, I think that's what I qualified as junk at the time. So maybe a few other things, but that was about the crap I cut out. And I went 10 straight months where there wasn't a day where I had a sweet chocolate, donut, ice cream, piece of pizza, bag of chips, soda. I didn't have any of that shit for 10 straight months. And, that was the kind of the start of my obsessive diet behavior kicking in. And I mixed that with more of a low carb approach, but really it was just about getting the shit out of my diet. And I was at a point where I was so overweight that any little change really would have made a big difference. And that did make a big difference. I lost about 45 pounds in that 10 months. Now I come back and I wanted to rejoin the football team. And since I had been an offensive lineman my whole life, that meant putting the weight back on. So I ended up gaining another 30 pounds and then going down another 30 pounds, gaining another 30 pounds and going down 45 pounds because of high school sports. And I'll get into that here now. But really from that, from this whole high school experience, I did learn a lot about consistency and work ethic. While I made a lot of mistakes, after my baseball games, after the away games, I was sneaking into our high school weight room. And I'm sorry, Coach Spickler, if you're listening to this, it was me. But I was sneaking into our, that was a confession right there, but I was sneaking into our high school weight room and I was working out by myself at like 9:30 at night, and I'd go home and I'd study and I'd go to bed. Or I was, I had those 10 months where I didn't eat a damn thing I deemed as unhealthy. And I learned how important consistency was for success in weightlifting. And that was really the first lesson I learned. Now, the type of consistency I had, I would really pay for later because everything in life has diminishing returns, I believe. And I really crossed the line into more obsessive behavior. And I definitely paid for that in the future, but we'll get there. And, I really did focus a lot on my behavior in this time, but I also focused a lot on learning. I became a total podcast sponge. Sometimes great podcast episodes, sometimes not great at podcast episodes, but the point was I was listening to people who knew more than me, and I was trying to absorb as much information as I could. And that would be a huge piece of advice I have for anyone listening to this. If you need to lose weight, first of all, for my thesis, you can tell I really believe in just the concept of practice and getting your reps in. And it doesn't always have to be practice based on actions. You can have practice based on listening to people who are smarter than you, knowing when people are smarter than you, and taking what they've learned. And then you have something new to try, right? Because if your practice is always the same, then your practice is going to hit a point where it reaches its ceiling and you just don't go anywhere from there. So you need to make sure that you're bringing new strategies, new ideas, new ideologies into your life and then trying them, and that's how you learn. And that was a big thing I was doing here. I was a sponge for podcasts. Back to the obsessive behavior issue, I was recording everything in an attempt to learn as well, and learning is very important. But I had a sheet, multiple pieces of paper where I would record my weight that morning, what I ate the previous day, the macro breakdown, my steps, my sleep, each individual food I ate to see how my body responded to it. And I had no idea what the fuck I was doing, but I wanted to take all of the guesswork out of my diet. It did not work because diet and nutrition is very hard. I mean, people get PhDs in these subjects just to try to understand the details. And just being a high school kid in his mom's basement trying to write down every single thing I consumed wasn't the most intelligent way to go about things. I really should have been focusing on the macro side of things, but I got really in the weeds, and I guess you learn from that. And part of the reason I'm doing episodes like this is to share all the fuck ups I've had so that you guys don't have the same fuck ups. But anyway, that was how I went through high school. I kind of went up and down, and I really zoned in with my work ethic and learned how to grind and be disciplined. I learned a lot about discipline. Motivation, I say this a lot, but motivation is one of those things where it gets you started and it gets you absolutely nowhere else. And that's why people go to the gym for a month or two and they stop. Because going to the gym or eating well has nothing to do with motivation. It has to do with discipline. It's like brushing your teeth. You might not want to do it every night, but you just fucking do it because it's an important part of your self-care, and it's just something you need to do. Just like I've been watching and monitoring what I eat for 8 years now, that isn't always something I want to do. It's just something I know is important, and I do it anyway. And the more you do something, the more invested you get. And I can't even imagine not paying attention to the quality of my diet, not paying attention to how active I am, because I have invested so much of myself into this process. But anyway, I go through high school like this, up and down in weight a few times, and the ups were intentional. I had to gain 30 pounds every football season, which was nice in the sense that I had missed eating whatever I wanted, and it gave me the excuse to do that. Probably not the best for my own physiology or psychology around fat loss, but after senior year of football, I dropped from 233. By the way, my peak weight was 245, but I was 2 inches short at the time. I didn't have muscle, so it doesn't really compare well to where I'm at now, which is 190, but just for the fun fact. And I finished senior year of football at 233, and then I dropped down to 188 right before I go to college. And that was an absolute trip, because now I'm going to college and people think of me as like the lean guy that works out. And it was like, I was just referred to as fat Medich by all of my friends. And in an endearing way. I mean, I love my friends and I took a lot of shit for my weight, but I never had any dramatic experiences with bullying. I don't want it to sound like that, but it was just a total trip. I went from being the overweight kid my whole life to just being a person people saw as lean or fit or in shape. Super weird, and it's something I'm still getting used to years and years later. But this was a point where I started to get a little bit, if I don't like regrets, and we don't get do-overs in life, so it's kind of a waste of energy. But if there's any point in the process I could go back and change what I was doing, this would be the point, because this is where my consistency and my effort went too far, and I crossed a line that took me years to get back to a healthier place. So one thing I did, this is very small, but I was trying things like juice cleanses, which are fucking stupid. I go over this shit all the time, but go back to my thesis. Focus on forever, not instant gratification. Here's when I was focusing a lot on instant gratification. I was doing juice cleanses. I was trying meal plans. I was fucking microwaving salmon in my college dorm room. I can't even tell you how much that shit stunk. I was going to the gym 2 times a day, and I wasn't going to the gym 2 times a day to socialize or to work out at a moderate intensity. I was going at one time to do a sprint on the treadmill, sprint until I felt like I was going to puke. And then I was going another time to lift weights. And the intensities I worked up to, and recruiting motor unit recruitment, lifting at high intensities, again, it's about practice. And the more I increased the intensity of my lifts, the better I got at it. And it spiraled out of control. And I started lifting at the intensity that I referred to as mom lifting a car off of her child intensity, where the adrenaline rush I could just snap into at any moment of any day was so absurd and so unhealthy for how draining and fatiguing it was. I want to stick to diet and nutrition, but this was an important part of the process of me learning. I had been through this journey where it seemed like whenever I hit a plateau, all I needed to do to overcome that plateau was to try harder. And that was true until it got to the point where I was trying so hard that I was, sleeping 11 hours a night, and I was trying not to fall asleep all day because I was so exhausted. I was moody and irritable all the time because I was so fucking worn out. And the same thing happens to this day. If I get a little overtrained, I get moody and irritable, and I realize that, and I slow shit down. And I had headaches. I was lightheaded all the time. I was physically a mess. I had a list of symptoms this fucking long. I could go through it for a while, but that's not the point. The point was the lesson that I had learned, that more was not always better. And there's a line you cross where more becomes worse, and I blown the fuck by that line because of my lack of patience and because of my need for instant gratification. I didn't need meal plans that involved me spending way too much money at Whole Foods on ultra-organic clean food and microwaving salmon in my college dorm room. I could have been lean as fuck, strong as fuck, and happy as fuck, and much less stressed out if I knew how to eat my dining hall food in a way that supported my goals, which would be tracking macros, eating mostly clean foods, but not obsessing over it, and strength training like a normal human being as opposed to a mom lifting a child off her car. But that was really I realized, I think it was January or February of that year, I was literally like, okay, something is wrong with me. I'm constantly exhausted, irritable, feel like shit. I feel like my body is shutting, and my body was literally shutting down on itself. And I wanted to figure out why. So I started to learn a little bit about why. And I really went on a maybe 2-year journey into putting health first. So this was an important milestone in that, here were my appearance and strength goals, and here were my health goals before. Actually, my health goals didn't exist before. I didn't give a fuck. And now here are my health goals, and here are my strength and nutrition goals. And that was really, really important for me. It took me a while to back off. I didn't go from this level of intensity to this level of intensity. I went down the staircase and I gradually got there because I was scared to not work as hard, because up until this point, hard work had changed my life in so many ways. And going back to where I was, like I mentioned, I grew up the fat kid my whole life. And when I lost the weight, I was getting, it was never about, I never lost the weight for one reason. It was obviously very multifactorial. But losing the weight was never really about getting attention or people, giving me compliments. I actually hated getting compliments because it reminded me that I was overweight to begin with. It took me a while to accept compliments because I never looked at it as I did a great thing. I looked at it as I stopped doing a shitty thing, which was living so overweight and punching so below my potential as a human being. In reality, at this point, I just liked the respect that I got from how I was. It really blew my mind how people who had nothing to do with my appearance, teachers, coaches, colleagues, random strangers in the streets, people that shouldn't have cared at all that I looked different, gave me more attention and more respect and treated me, whatever the opposite of lesser is, they treated me as a greater being just because of this change. And it really, maybe to someone who hasn't lived that, they might be rolling their eyes, but it all the little subtleties of the attention and respect people gave you changed. And it was like I was a totally different person, even though on the inside I was like, I'm the exact same person, but people treat me totally different, right? And I was very scared to go back to that place. So that's why I gradually decreased really my work ethic and my intensity, because that had served me so well up until this point. And there's a reason the Medich brand logo is quite literally a barbell being balanced. And it's because one of the greatest fitness lessons I ever learned was one that most people learn at a young age, but it took me a while to learn. And that's just how important balance is and how you can't just bang your head into a wall 24/7. Sometimes you have to rest, give your head some time to heal, and keep going from there. But some of the things I did were like I said, it was baby steps. I went from structured meal plans where I had to eat the exact same thing every day to just ultra clean eating. And that was a step in the right direction. I didn't have to eat the same things every single day, but I still only ate absurdly clean things, and I peppered in little treats that fit my macros, and that was big. I started walking 12,000 steps a day as opposed to sprinting every day for my cardio, which, as ridiculous as that sounds, was a huge improvement. 12,000 steps a day is not a ridiculous feat or anything like that, but when you have an Excel sheet of hundreds of days straight where you recorded your steps and your weight and you hit 12,000 steps every single day, you're bordering on those obsessive tendencies, if you ask me. But I reverse dieted, and that was big for me. Basically, for those of you who don't know what a reverse diet is you actually increase your calories over time. So I knew I had been stuck in a caloric deficit for well over a year. I was grinding my gears, and I was in a place where the tiny bit of body fat I still had, and at this point I was lean. I had visible abs. I was actually getting kind of skinny, and I didn't really realize it because I was so obsessed with like, oh, my love handles. And in all reality, you have to let your body fat disperse naturally a bit. You lose the body fat and then just focus on sustainability, the long term. That's really going to be one of the big themes of this video. But Anyway, at that point, I was reverse dieting because I knew I needed to eat more calories because I knew more calories would help me feel less awful. And my goal at this point in my life was just to not feel awful. So that meant increasing my calories about 100 calories a week. And I ended up starting at 2650 calories, which at the time was a little higher than my normal, and working my way all the way up to 3,800 calories and staying there. Throughout this process, I went from 185 to 202, but I put on a lot of muscle, and that was over a pretty good period of time. I would guess about 6 months. I'm going off of memory, but point being, I went from kind of skinny fat to just kind of a beefcake. I'll use the term a beefcake. I was like beefy. I was stronger. I was bigger, but I did carry a little more body fat, but it was more evenly dispersed. It wasn't that ugly, only in my love handles appearance they had before, because that love handle fat is just the last to go, and I didn't have the patience to wait for it to go away. So body fat, unfortunately, is not lost in a uniform census. You don't get down to your goal weight, your goal body fat percentage, and look perfect. Typically, you're weirdly skinny in some places. Like for me, I was really skinny in my arms, but I had fat in my love handles. It's just a true fact about fat loss. And it's a terrible excuse to slam your head into a wall again and go overboard. But anyway, those were some of the steps I took to focus on my health. I let myself eat different foods on a day-to-day basis. I switched to walking for my cardio, even though I was still too obsessive about it. And I reverse dieted, which was probably the biggest thing. And I started going to the gym 4 days a week to lift weights instead of 6, which was big as well. I got on a real program. Shout out to Joe DeFranco. I used his Strong Bastard 911 program, and I made the first strength gains I had made since years because I was eating, and that was really it. And my body thanked me for it. So now, and then from there, not a ton changed going forward. That was the big monumental step. I learned a lot of things on the way towards learning balance between life and goals. I learned how to go out and drink with friends and not have that ruin my life. One of the biggest lessons I had to learn with that was I had to control my binge eating. All of the years of really hardcore restriction created a binge eating habit for me, which would rear its head when I was out drinking with friends, and alcohol kind of brought my guard level down. And I would eat so much my mouth would hurt the next day. I'd have cuts in my mouth from all the food and stuff that I've gotten into, really nasty stuff. And that took me a while to get over as well. I really had to limit my anxiety around food, my fear of overeating. That was really the cure. The cure to getting rid of my binge eating tendencies was to stop setting myself up for the binge. And how I did that was by not over-restricting myself. That was one, not over-restricting myself, not fearing a binge, understanding that eating an extra 300 to 500 calories is not a big deal, but eating those 300 to 500 calories and saying fuck it and eating everything is a big deal. And then also not having things in my life that create an environment to binge. For example, actually relatively very recently, and this is a problem that is mostly out of the woods with, but not entirely. And recently I stopped tracking my weight and my calories every morning on an Excel sheet. So what I did was I would weigh in every morning and I would track my weight from that morning and the calories I ate the day before every single day. And then at the end of the week, I would average those numbers up and I would get an average amount of calories consumed for the week and an average weight for the week. And like a lot of things I mentioned so far, it was a great learning experience, but the mental stress of knowing I was going to have to write down my weight and my calorie consumption the next day was contributing to those binge eating tendencies because I couldn't simply eat a few extra 100 calories without stressing about it because I knew I'd have to write it down the next day. That was a little thing. I didn't expect it to develop into a problem, but it did. And taking that out absolutely helped with the binge eating side of things. So now I'm in a place where I value my health and the quality of food I eat, but I don't go crazy about it. And I let myself fall into that if it fits your macros. If I'm good on calories and protein, I just try to be pretty good on the quality of food I eat. Obviously, there's certain foods that aren't great for me that I eat all the time. And you know what? I think eating those foods and incorporating them in my diet is better than the alternative from a health perspective, when the alternative is either being overweight or being not overweight and incredibly unhealthy from a stress management and a lifestyle standpoint. So let me bring all this back to the thesis that I said at the top of the YouTube video. I'm going to say it again. The goal is to create a caloric deficit in a way you can manage and to maintain your overall deficit for the weeks, months, or years needed to get where you want to be. I never lost weight without a caloric deficit, and you never will lose weight without a caloric deficit. Losing weight is about a whole lot more than simply a caloric deficit, but without a caloric deficit, you will not lose a pound ever. So that's point one. That's right off the bat. That's why I started my thesis with that. This is a behavior-focused goal, and it requires a ton of practice and a ton of trial and error to find what works well for you. It's unfortunate, but I'm 8 years into this process, and I'm still figuring this shit out, and that's totally cool. But you're gonna have to work hard, and you're gonna have to work hard for a long time. There's fortunate people out there that can snap into a healthy lifestyle quicker than others, and then there's people who grind their gears for years like I did. But the important part is that you're learning and you're trying and you're practicing. Throughout this process, never focus on instant gratification, always focus on forever. Whether it was any of these stories, I talked through 10 months of no junk food, perfectly clean eating, meal plans, juice cleanses. All of the biggest mistakes I made were because I was impatient and I wanted to get rid of those love handles right now. I wanted to get as lean as I could be right now. I wanted to do it all right now. I had no patience. Fat loss should never be about what you want now. It should be about losing that fat forever and creating sustainable habits that you can eat until the day you die. So if you start a diet and a few days in you hate it, how much are you going to hate it in a few years? You're not, because you're not going to be doing it in a few years, because you're going to quit and you're going to go right back to the way you ate before. If your goal is to find the easiest way to eat less for the rest of your life, then you'll find the behaviors you personally need to keep the weight off for the rest of your life. Basically just summed up the rest of my thesis. It's about behaviors you can maintain forever, and that's how you get to lower weights you can maintain forever. All while keeping in mind the main goal is to create a caloric deficit, because without that caloric deficit, you're not going to get anywhere. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. If you guys have made it to 30 minutes in the video, wow, thanks for listening to me this long. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I hope I didn't say too much or smack my lips or do anything annoying, but here we are. That's my fat loss story. It's a continuation, and I mean in the sense that I will never stop working on my relationship with food or really the way I look or the way I feel. I think these are goals that are forever going to be important to me. They can just start to assume a more reasonable piece of my life as opposed to dominating my life. And that's a beautiful thing that I've been working on for 8 years now. Hopefully some of my stories, my experiences, and my overall thesis on fat loss have helped you guys. I went to school for this stuff. I got a certification for this stuff. I have the formal education, but I really didn't learn jack shit about the behaviors needed for weight loss or the habits or really what makes weight loss work. Because like I said in my thesis statement, weight loss is super simple from a physiological standpoint. You just eat less over time. And the hard part comes from the psychological side of things. And the only way I really learned about that was through this story I just shared with you guys. And that's why I think this stuff is so important. And that's why these are stories and lessons I don't think I'll ever really quit harping on. And really that's the reason I started Medich Brand in general, is because I've been down such ridiculously obsessive roads that I've learned lessons that people won't learn because people won't go down those roads. And that's not to brag or to do anything like that. It's just I have all this information. It'd be a shame not to share it with people who may not know. So that was my fat loss story, where I stand on fat loss now. And my advice to you guys is to find that balance, find those behaviors that allow you to eat in a way that you can eat for the rest of your life. Again, I hate to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to. Focus on the forever. Don't focus on the now. Obviously, focus on restricting those calories. But remember, fat loss is about behaviors and finding what behaviors works for you. So try things, practice, work hard, be patient. It takes fucking forever. You will have those areas like I had with the love handles that you want to get rid of that take forever to go away. And it sucks, but once you realize that's just how it is, at least you know what you're working with. At least you know what you're up against. Don't listen to any bullshit media, any marketers telling you can lose, 30 pounds in a month or whatever stupid shit it is. Take the slow route. Take the route that will stick. Remember, the faster you lose weight, the more likely you are to put it back on. The slower you lose it, the more likely you are to keep it. So take the slow and steady route. Work hard. Be patient. If you ever need me for any thoughts, consultations on fat loss, whatever it may be, my Instagram DMs are always open. My YouTube comments are always open. I'm happy to help. I may not get to everybody's questions, but I answer the questions that, honestly, I answer the questions like these that I feel are most important. If you're going to ask me something you can quickly Google, I might not answer. But if you ask me about something, anything related in this video, I really do want to help, and I'd be happy to help. So thanks for listening. Appreciate you guys sticking through the video, and hopefully you learned something. Good luck, and I'll talk to you next time.